On the night of June 5, 1944, German military intelligence in Madrid believed their best agent in Britain had just saved them from disaster. The Abwehr, Nazi Germany's military intelligence service, had spent 2 years building their entire understanding of Allied troop movements around the reports of one trusted operative and his network of 27 agents inside the United Kingdom. They paid this network the modern equivalent of millions of dollars. They had never once doubted it was real. What German intelligence did not know was that every one of those 27 agents had been invented. On paper, in letters, in the imagination of 2 men working out of a modest house in North London. The network had been feeding Berlin lies for 3 straight years, and not one person in the Abwehr had ever caught on. So how did a failed Spanish chicken farmer, with no training, no weapons, and no real spy network at all, manage to convince the most feared intelligence apparatus in Europe that 27 non-existent people were risking their lives for the Third Reich for 3 years, right up until the eve of D-Day? By the spring of 1944, the Allies were preparing the largest amphibious invasion in human history. Operation Overlord would eventually commit more than 150,000 troops to the beaches of Normandy on a single morning, supported by nearly 7,000 vessels and over 11,000 aircraft. But the planners in London were haunted by one unforgiving fact. If German High Command knew where the landings were actually going to happen, the invasion could be annihilated before it ever got off the sand. The stakes were not abstract. Allied commanders had already watched amphibious assaults go catastrophically wrong when surprise was lost. Costly lessons from raids like Dieppe in 1942 had taught planners exactly how quickly a defended beach turns into a slaughterhouse. Germany had 11 divisions stationed in Normandy alone, with dozens more positioned across France, Belgium, and the Low Countries, capable of being redirected within days if Berlin understood where the real blow was coming. If those reinforcements converged on Normandy in the first 48 hours, historians have long argued the invasion could have been thrown back into the sea. So the Allies built an elaborate deception architecture around the invasion, codenamed Operation Bodyguard, with its centerpiece operation called Fortitude. The goal was audacious: convince the German High Command that the real invasion would land far to the northeast at the Pas de Calais, the narrowest crossing point of the English Channel, and that anything happening in Normandy was a secondary feint. To sell that lie, the Allies needed something physical: inflatable tanks, fake radio traffic, a phantom army group under General George Patton's name. But hardware alone could not convince Berlin. They needed something Berlin already trusted completely: a human source, already inside the German intelligence apparatus, whose credibility had been built for years. That source already existed. He had been operating completely undetected since 1941. His name, to MI5, to his German handlers, and eventually to history, became one of the strangest in the entire war: Garbo. Before any of it, though, he was simply a Spaniard named Juan Pujol Garcia, and almost nobody wanted him. Juan Pujol Garcia was born in Barcelona on February 14, 1912, the third of 4 children. His father owned a dye factory and held firmly liberal political views in a Spain that was rapidly polarizing. Juan was sent to boarding school at Vaidemia, just outside Barcelona, where he was only permitted to leave the grounds on Sundays to see his father, a detail that decades later, friends would point to as the root of his lifelong restlessness, his hunger to be somewhere else, doing something that mattered. There was nothing about his early life that suggested spy. After boarding school, Pujol trained at the Royal Poultry School in Arenys de Mar, the only formal qualification he would earn in his entire youth. He went on to manage a chicken farm. Before the war that would define him, Juan Pujol Garcia's professional identity was, quite literally, poultry. Then came the Spanish Civil War in 1936, and Pujol made a decision that revealed more about his character than any resume could. He refused to commit to either side. He spent nearly 2 years evading conscription into the Republican Army, hiding from recruitment patrols, before eventually being swept into Republican ranks anyway, and then deliberately deserting to cross over to the nationalist side. By his own account, corroborated by multiple biographers, he managed to survive the entire war on both sides of the front line without ever firing a single shot at another human being. He wasn't a coward. He was something rarer in that decade, a man who had looked at both ideological extremes tearing his country apart and decided he despised them equally. That hatred crystallized when he returned to civilian life in Madrid in 1939 and watched Nazi propaganda flood the city. Pujol later described his feelings in a sentence that biographers still quote because it sounds almost too perfect to be true. And yet, it is documented in his own words. He wanted to start a personal war with Adolf Hitler, and he intended to fight it with his imagination. This is the detail that separates Pujol from almost every other agent in this channel's archive. He had no weapons training, no cryptography background, no connections inside any intelligence service. What he had was a wife, Araceli, by every account the co-architect of his entire scheme, and a conviction that deception itself could be a weapon as powerful as a rifle. In early 1941, the couple made their first move. Pujol approached the British embassy in Madrid and volunteered to spy for the Allies against Germany. He was turned down. He tried again in Lisbon, turned down again. By some accounts, he attempted contact with British intelligence on 3 separate occasions and was rebuffed every single time. Not because the offer wasn't tempting, but because British officers in Madrid in 1941 had no reliable way to verify that this unemployed Spaniard with no credentials wasn't simply a German plant testing their defenses, or a fantasist wasting their time. So Pujol and Araceli changed strategy entirely. If the British wouldn't take him on his word, he would build credibility somewhere else first. Somewhere that would actually hand him the tools to prove himself. In early 1941, he walked into the German embassy in Madrid and volunteered to spy for the Abwehr instead, presenting himself as a fanatical, true-believing supporter of the New World Order. It worked instantly. The Germans, hungry for eyes inside Britain, recruited him on the spot, gave him a code name, Alaric, a small amount of money, a bottle of invisible ink, and instructions to travel to London and begin building a network of informants. Pujol never went to London. He didn't have a visa, didn't speak fluent English, and had never set foot in the country. Instead, he and Araceli relocated quietly to Lisbon, Portugal, neutral ground, far easier to operate from, and crucially, full of British and American newspapers, library reference books, and an English tourist map he purchased from a local shop. Using nothing more than that map, a blue guide to Britain, a railway and shipping schedule he found in a public library, and his own imagination, Pujol began inventing an entire spy network in a country he had never visited, reporting on troop movements he had never seen, to a German intelligence service that had no way to check his work, because as far as the Abwehr knew, their newest asset was already inside enemy territory. Remember this, every single report Juan Pujol sent to Germany for the next year would be invented from a hotel room in Lisbon, and the fate of the Allied invasion of Europe would eventually hinge on whether the Germans kept believing it. Tomas Harris, the British intelligence officer who would later become Pujol's handler and closest collaborator, articulated the insight at the heart of this entire operation in a 1946 internal summary that remained classified for decades. Harris understood something that German counterintelligence never accounted for. An intelligence service that prides itself on careful verification can be destroyed by its own desire to believe good news. The Abwehr wasn't fooled because they were incompetent. They were fooled because Pujol gave them exactly what an overstretched, undermanned wartime intelligence bureaucracy desperately wanted. A prolific, reliable-sounding source who made their jobs look successful. Once Berlin started believing the network was real, every subsequent report that confirmed their existing assumptions became easier to accept than the alternative, admitting that for over a year they had been paying and trusting a complete fiction. The mechanics of what Pujol built are, frankly, the reason espionage historians still study this case as a masterclass in deception architecture. It started small, and it started clumsy. Working from Lisbon with almost no real information, Pujol's earliest reports to his German handlers contained genuine, verifiable errors. Currency conversions that didn't make sense, descriptions of British life that didn't quite match reality, because he was inventing a country he had never lived in. A normal intelligence service would have caught this immediately. But Pujol had already built in his own safety valve. He didn't claim sole authorship of every fact. From the very beginning, he began inventing sub-agents, fictional collaborators scattered around Britain, who could be blamed individually whenever a detail didn't hold up. A mistake wasn't Pujol's failure, it was Agent Number 4's failure, or Agent Number 7's failure. The network absorbed its own errors the way a real bureaucracy absorbs incompetence, by diffusing blame across personnel who, in this case, did not exist. The first fictional operative was a Portuguese-based courier. Pujol's German handlers were told he had recruited a sympathetic Royal Dutch Airlines pilot willing to smuggle written messages between Lisbon and London for cash. This single invention was elegant for a specific reason. It explained, in a totally mundane way, why Pujol's letters sometimes took days to arrive. Real spy networks have logistics problems. Inventing a fictional KLM pilot gave Pujol's fiction the texture of logistics friction, the kind of small, boring inconvenience that makes a lie feel like reality. By 1944, working alongside his MI5 handler Thomas Harris, the network had grown to 27 distinct fictional sub-agents, each with a constructed biography, a profession, a location, and a personality. There was a Venezuelan student living in Glasgow, reporting on shipping activity on the River Clyde. There was a Gibraltarian waiter working in a restaurant frequented by diplomats, positioned to overhear sensitive conversations. There was an indiscreet American Army sergeant, useful for leaking details about U.S. troop deployments. And in one of the more darkly comic inventions of the entire war, there was a fictional Welsh nationalist and fascist sympathizer, supposedly leading a fringe group called the Brothers of the Aryan World Order out of Swansea, a character so absurd and so perfectly tailored to what German ideologues wanted to believe existed inside wartime Britain that the Abwehr never once questioned him. Each of these characters had to be sustained with internal consistency across years of correspondence. Harris and Pujol wrote 315 separate letters together, averaging 2,000 words apiece. That's over 600,000 words of fabricated military intelligence, biography, and operational detail, all addressed to a post office box in Lisbon the Germans had set up to receive it. The letters used what intelligence professionals call secret writing, a method where an apparently innocent handwritten letter conceals a second, hidden layer of text written between the lines using a chemical solution invisible until developed with a separate reagent. To an inspector glancing at the envelope, it looked like a tedious personal letter from a Spanish acquaintance. Decoded, it was a military intelligence report. The genius of the operation wasn't simply that it was a lie, it was that the lie was deliberately, almost unbearably verbose. The official post-war history of British intelligence in the Second World War described what Harris and Pujol built as so detailed, so saturated with names, cross-references, and subplots that German intelligence in Spain became completely overwhelmed trying to process it. And as a direct result, stopped attempting to recruit any additional independent agents inside Britain at all. Why would they need to? They already believed they had 27. Here's a short beat to slow down on. The drop was set. The agent had 11 minutes. That's not hyperbole drawn from Pujol's case specifically. It's the texture of real wartime courier work that ran underneath operations like this one, where every letter, every microfilm packet, every coded transmission had a tight window to make a scheduled flight, a particular ferry, a specific contact point before suspicion could build. Pujol and Harris operated inside exactly that kind of pressure. Except the thing they were protecting wasn't a physical drop. It was a fiction that could collapse the instant it contradicted itself. The first true test of whether the network could survive contact with reality came in November 1942, just before Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. Pujol's invented agent on the River Clyde reported that a convoy of troop ships and warships, camouflaged for Mediterranean operations, had departed port. The letter was real, sent by airmail, postmarked appropriately, but British intelligence deliberately delayed its delivery so it would arrive in Germany too late to be operationally useful. It was a calculated risk. Give the Germans something true enough to be impressive, timed precisely so it could never actually help them. When the letter finally arrived, the Abwehr's reply came back warm with appreciation. They apologized that the information had arrived too late to act on, and added, without a hint of suspicion, that the previous reports had been magnificent. That single exchange became the network's founding proof of concept. The Germans had now wasted real resources reacting to a fictional asset's tip, and instead of growing suspicious, they grew more confident in their spy. From that point forward, British intelligence understood exactly what they had: a tool for feeding the German high command precisely calibrated truth and fiction, mixed in whatever proportion would do the most strategic damage at the moment it mattered most. By April 1942, Pujol had finally made the contact with British intelligence he'd been chasing for over a year. In Lisbon, his case was reviewed by Desmond Bristow of MI6's Iberian section, and this time, the answer was different. Because by now, Pujol could prove, with intercepted German communications, that he had already deceived the Abwehr for nearly a year without being caught. He was brought to Britain via Gibraltar, arriving in Plymouth on April 24, 1942. His case was handed to a Spanish-speaking officer named Tomás Harris, and together, in what the official history of British intelligence in World War II would later call one of those rare partnerships between two exceptionally gifted men whose inventive genius inspired and complemented each other, they spent the next 2 years turning a one-man fiction into the most elaborate deception network of the war. If at any point the Germans had pulled a single thread, cross-checked one biography, dispatched a courier to physically verify one sub-agent's existence, the entire structure could have unraveled, and Pujol's actual identity, along with his family's safety, would have been exposed. He never let that thread get pulled. If you're finding stories like this fascinating, the ones where the war wasn't won with tanks or bombers, but with patience, paperwork, and a single convincing lie, we cover the hidden spies and deceptions that decided history like this every single week. Worth sticking around for. The institution being deceived here wasn't a single commander, it was the Abwehr itself, and specifically its station in Madrid, which prided itself on having successfully built a functioning espionage presence inside Britain, at a moment when German intelligence assets elsewhere in the UK had been almost entirely rounded up and turned by MI5's broader double-cross system. By 1942 and 1943, the Abwehr's leadership believed their Alaric network, the codename under which Pujol's fiction operated, was one of their few unambiguous successes in Britain. A rare bright spot in an otherwise badly compromised intelligence picture. That institutional pride is precisely what made them vulnerable. German handlers in Madrid had every incentive to defend the network's credibility internally, because admitting Alaric was fake would have meant admitting their own operational judgment had failed for years. The Abwehr paid the network roughly the equivalent of $340,000 over the course of the war to fund 27 salaries, 27 sets of expenses, 27 cover lives, money funneled to a post office box, and, eventually, a fictional bank account, with not 1 cent of it ever reaching an actual human being inside Britain. There's a particular irony documented in Harris's own post-war summary of the case. The Germans were so pleased with the volume and apparent detail of what Alaric's network produced that, according to the official history, they made no further serious attempts to recruit additional independent agents inside the United Kingdom at all during this period. Why diversify a portfolio that was already outperforming every other asset on the books? German intelligence had effectively let a fictional spy ring crowd out the development of a real one. By the spring of 1944, the entire architecture Pujol and Harris had spent 2 years constructing was about to be aimed at the single most important moment of the European war. Special arrangements were made with the German radio operators in Madrid to stay alert through the night of June 5th into June 6th, 1944. They were told that one of Garbo's sub-agents was about to arrive with urgent, time-critical information. This was by design. The plan required Garbo to warn the Germans that an invasion was imminent, to protect his credibility for the years of deception still ahead, but to time the warning so precisely that by the moment it was decoded and acted upon, Allied troops would already be waiting onto the beaches of Normandy. Picture the radio operator on the British end, working through the small hours, tapping out a message timed almost to the minute, knowing that if it arrived even a few hours too early, German reserves could reposition and the entire invasion could be bloodied beyond recovery. The message went out. It described unusual troop activity and movement consistent with an imminent assault. True information deliberately released at the one moment it could do no operational good. The Germans received it, logged it, and treated Garbo's warning as further proof of his reliability rather than as the live alarm it technically was. By the time anyone in Berlin could have acted meaningfully on it, the first landing craft were already committed. Then came the moment the entire deception had been built toward. In the days immediately following the actual Normandy landings, Garbo sent a message, drafted with Harris, transmitted on June 9, 1944, explicitly framing the Normandy assault as a diversionary feint, insisting the main invasion force under the fictional 1st United States Army Group, supposedly commanded by General George Patton, was still poised to strike at the Pas de Calais. This was the single highest-stakes transmission of Garbo's entire career. If German High Command had instead concluded Normandy was the real and only invasion, Hitler's reserve divisions stationed near Calais could have been redirected south within days, potentially overwhelming the fragile Allied beachhead before it could be reinforced. It worked. German intelligence acted on Garbo's assessment. Significant Wehrmacht reserves, including powerful units that could have been decisive against the exposed Normandy beachhead, were held back in the Pas de Calais region for weeks after the actual invasion had already begun, guarding against a second wave that would never come. Somewhere in a radio room in Madrid, a German officer who trusted Alaric completely was, at that exact moment, helping to lose the war for his own side, and had absolutely no way of knowing it. Strip away the drama and look only at what can be documented, and the numbers still sound implausible. A fictional network of 27 people, invented and sustained by 2 men, operated undetected by German intelligence for roughly 3 years. Pujol and Harris produced 315 written letters, averaging 2,000 words each, over 600,000 words of fabricated intelligence, followed by more than 500 radio messages transmitted between January and June of 1944 alone, at times exceeding 20 messages in a single day. German intelligence paid the equivalent of approximately $340,000 to fund a spy ring that existed entirely on paper. Historians studying the German side of this case still find the scale of the failure difficult to fully reconstruct, precisely because so much of the Abwehr's internal correspondence about Alaric treated the network with the same institutional confidence reserved for their most reliable, verified assets. There was, by design, nothing in the paper trail that should have triggered alarm. And the strategic payoff was proportionally enormous. By helping to keep an estimated 19 German divisions tied down near Calais in the critical weeks after D-Day, Garbeau's deception arguably did as much to protect the fragile Normandy beachhead as any single combat unit that landed there on June 6th. The closest historical comparison most intelligence historians reach for is the double-cross system as a whole, of which Garbeau was the single most productive component. But where most double agents in that system managed 1 or 2 German handlers, Pujol and Harris ran the equivalent of an entire fictional intelligence directorate by themselves, a scale of single-handler deception that has rarely been replicated in any conflict since. For his service, Juan Pujol Garcia was awarded the Iron Cross by Nazi Germany in 1944. They believed, until the war's end, that Alaric deserved one of their highest honors for his service to the Reich. The British, in parallel, awarded him an MBE, Member of the Order of the British Empire, making him one of the only individuals in the entire Second World War formally decorated by both sides of the conflict, each side believing, for entirely opposite reasons, that he had served them faithfully. Then Pujol simply disappeared. Fearing Nazi reprisal even after Germany's surrender, there were still believers within fascist networks who might have sought revenge had they learned the truth. British intelligence helped stage his death from malaria in 1949, complete with a fabricated account delivered to his own first family. Araceli and their children believed for decades that Juan had died in Africa. In reality, he had relocated quietly to Venezuela, working first as an English teacher for Shell oil employees, later running a small bookstore, remarrying, and building a second, entirely ordinary life under a false identity. The same skill set that had once fooled the Abwehr, now simply protecting a chicken farmer's son from a war that had technically already ended. His true story remained buried until 1984, when British military historian Nigel West tracked him down in Venezuela and confirmed he was still alive. That same year, on the 40th anniversary of D-Day, Pujol traveled to Normandy and stood on Omaha Beach among veterans of the invasion he had helped protect. Men who, until that day, had no idea the quiet Spanish stranger in front of them had spent the war convincing Hitler's intelligence service that the entire battle they fought in was a decoy. He died in 1988 in Caracas, having lived just long enough to be properly thanked. The lesson historians and intelligence professionals keep returning to with this case is not really about spycraft at all. It's about institutional confidence as a vulnerability. The Abwehr wasn't beaten because Pujol was a master of disguise or hand-to-hand combat. He never fired a weapon in this war either, just as he hadn't in the last one. He won because an intelligence bureaucracy that desperately wanted to believe it was succeeding will accept almost any volume of information that confirms that belief. And the more elaborate and verbose the lie, the harder it becomes to ever audit. Pujol's files sit today in Britain's National Archives, declassified in January 1999, available to anyone who wants to read, in Harris's own handwriting, exactly how 27 people who never existed helped determine the outcome of the most important single day of the Second World War.